Now let us discuss the age of revival or revival of learning, which started from 1400 to 1550. The age of revival or the revival of learning in English literature occurred during the Middle Ages or the medieval time period. It is the precursor to the Renaissance, which brought the transition from the medieval period to the modern age, when English became the major language of not only the common people but also of the court and the clergy by the close of 16th century. It can be called the time period or transition period that occurred between two ages, age of Chaucer and the age of Elizabeth. It is called the age of revival because there was a renewed interest in studying the classics of the Greeks among the Italians. The spirit of learning moved from Italy to England. So, what was the condition of England during the age of revival? England was constantly at war with France during this period, and due to its main focus on battles and wars, for example, the Battle of Agincourt that was fought in 1415 and the bloody wars of the Roses which occurred between 1455 to 1485, it was continued for many years between two peaceful families of House of England. No literature of merit was composed or written during this time. But still, there were a few important poets of the revival period which we must know. The first important poet of the age of revival was Francesco Petrarch. Petrarch was an Italian humanist, Italian thinker, poet, philosopher, and a writer. And he was one of the major influences on Chaucer and the poets later on. He is credited to be one of the fathers of humanism or the father of Renaissance. He had studied classical Greek authors, but most of his works were written in Latin. Chaucer also based his Canterbury Tales on the Latin version of Petrarch's Decameron. So that was the influence of Petrarch on the English poets. Sir Thomas More, Thomas Wyatt, and Henry Howard translated Petrarch's sonnets. Philip Sidney's Astrophel and Stella and Edmund Spenser's Amoreti were also influenced by Petrarchan models. So Petrarch had heavily influenced the later English poets. The most important development that happened in this time was the arrival of printing press that was brought to England by William Caxton in 1476. And for the first time in history, it was possible for a book or an idea to reach the whole nation via book form in a printed form. Schools and universities were established in places of old monasteries. Greek ideas and Greek culture came to England in the Renaissance, and man's spiritual freedom was also claimed in the Reformation. Now the importance was begin to be given to the common man and his existence rather than the monarchy, kings, or other things. The revival of learning enlightened the human mind after the darkness of the Middle Ages. Now the term Renaissance, though used by many writers to denote whole transition from the Middle Ages to the modern world, is more correctly applied to the revival of art resulting from the discovery and imitations of the classical models in the 14th and 15th centuries. So this was a time period when the classical models were renewed and they were a source of inspiration for the writers to create their poetry and art. We use the term revival of learning to cover the whole movement, whose essence was that man discovered himself and the universe. And according to Taine, that man so long blinded had suddenly opened his eyes and seen the world around him. Now let's discuss the other important writers of the Age of Revival. Roger Ascham, a famous classical scholar who published a book called Toxophilus, or The School of Shooting, in 1545, in which he expresses or apologizes to a very widespread dissatisfaction over the neglect of native literature. He advocated the use of English language in poetry and literature through his book Toxophilus. The two greatest books which appeared in England during this period are undoubtedly Erasmus's Praise of Folly and Moore's Utopia, the famous kingdom of nowhere. These books were written in Latin but were speedily translated into all European languages. Erasmus's Praise of Folly is about a song of victory for the new learning, a new awareness among people because of increase in education which had driven away vice, ignorance and superstition, the three enemies of humanity. It was published in 1511. It is a critique on the foolish standards of education, the cruelty of kings, and the selfishness of the clergy. Next is More's Utopia, which was published in 1516, and it is a powerful and original study of social conditions of England. Thomas More's book Utopia describes the travels of one man, Raphael Hethlode, to an undiscovered island, and there he considers to be the best country on earth. Now this island is called as Utopia. Utopia in English means a place of nowhere. In the book, Thomas More, not only the author but also a main character, arrives in Antwerp on a business trip where he runs into or meets an old friend, Peter Giles, and meets a new friend, Raphael Hethlode. Moore learns from a sailor named Amerigo Vespucci's companions of a wonderful kingdom of nowhere in which all questions of labor, government, society, and religion have been easily settled by simple justice and common sense. As he hears of this wonderful country where everything is so justifiable and is followed by the law, Moore wonders why, after 15 centuries of Christianity in England, his own country, England, is so little civilized. So, through his book Utopia, Moore questions the conditions prevalent in England and criticizes the system of England. The next book, which is from this period and is important for us to know about, is Tyndale's New Testament, which was written in year 1525. Tyndale's Testament is greater than either of these books that I have discussed above, and it has a greater influence upon the common people. Now, what was this book about? Tyndale made his translation from the original Greek and later translated parts of the Old Testament from the Hebrew language. Much of Tyndale's work was included in Cranmer's Bible, known also as the Great Bible, in 1539. It was the foundation of the authorized version of Bibles. Another important piece of literature that is popular from this time period of the Age of Learning is a book collection or poetry collection by Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, known as Totel's Miscellany. About half of these poems were the work of Sir Thomas Wyatt and of Henry Howard, who was the Earl of Surrey. Both together wrote amorous or love sonnets modeled after the Italians, introducing a new verse form. There was a strange meter or a new meter that these poems were written in, and it was the meter known as the blank verse, which had never before appeared in English language. The chief literary work of these two men, therefore, is to introduce the sonnet and the blank verse, which later, in the hands of Shakespeare and Milton, were used to make the world's greatest masterpieces. So Thomas Wyatt and Earl of Surrey were responsible for giving us the blank verse, which was used by the later poets. Next is Malory's Motte Arthur, a collection of the Arthurian romances told in simple and vivid prose. Motte Arthur was written in 1470, and it is the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, beginning with Arthur's conception and birth and concluding with his death. We see many great figures in Motte Arthur like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Guinevere, etc. So that was all about the Age of Revival. We learned that the Age of Revival had some important developments that are worth noting, and the most important one is the arrival of the printing press by William Caxton, who brought the printing press in England in 1470. Then we learnt about various books or important literature of this period, in which we see that More's Utopia, Tyndale's New Testament, Motte Arthur, etc. So these are the important pieces of literature that were worth noting in the section of the Age of Revival, and a direct question to you can come from these pieces as to who wrote utopia. So you must remember that it was written by Thomas More. That is all about the age of revival. Kindly attempt the quizzes at the end of this chapter so that you can be sure of all the important points from this chapter. Moving on to next age, it will be the age of Elizabeth. Thank you for watching the video. See you in the next one.